We live in a culture that's based on going fast and achieving quickly and move, right? Like it's all achievement based. And when you're moving fast and you're moving quick, when is there time for real introspection?
Welcome to the Empowered Life Podcast,
a space dedicated to spreading the message that you have the power within to create everything you seek.
So if you're ready to enroll in a new kind of higher learning, the kind that leads to true personal freedom, hang here with us.
We're your hosts, Rudy and Aniston, and this is Empowered Life. Welcome to the Empowered Life Podcast. My name is Rudy Ricksteins, and I'm so excited to have you here. Again, every single time you choose to invest in yourself, it's another declaration that there is something else that you want to have, something you want to be, something you want to do, and something you want to achieve. And by listening to us today for this incredible conversation that I know is about to unfold, you are investing in you. Today, we're bringing somebody that has recently come into my orbit. Her name is Michelle Rios, and Michelle is just a wonderful human being. I have loved connecting with her on a number of occasions, and her energy is just so contagious. She is a motivational speaker. She is the host of a very popular self-development podcast. The podcast is called the Live Your Extraordinary Life Podcast. In addition to that, she also happens to coach people that are either executives inside of corporate America or people who are wanting to aspire to do a purpose-driven something outside of corporate America, which is really where I want to sink my teeth into what we're doing today, because so many people on the Empowered Life Podcast have a dream or a goal or a desire to have or to be or to do something, and they're in a day job, and they want to do something, and they want to get out of their day job, or they want to find value and meaning within their day job. And I think that you're the poster child for successfully being able to do that. Before I turn it over to you, Michelle, I just want to say, when I look at you and your life and your career, you excelled at every single level in your studies. And then, you excelled in corporate America. You spent 20 years investing in you and your life. And what everybody would say is you're doing everything the way that we're supposed to. And then you completely changed everything and you reinvented who you are and what you do and how you show up. And I think it's just going to be fascinating for our listeners. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us on the Empowered Life Podcast today.
Oh my gosh, Rudy. Well, thank you so much for a lovely introduction. I could not be happier to be here. I'm so excited for this conversation. I know it's going to be super engaging.
Well, thank you again. And so I want to start off just again by giving our audience a little bit of your backstory. I alluded to you have spent 20 years climbing the corporate ladder and that you were an executive in corporate America, and then all of a sudden you decided to leave. And so I would like to at least give us a little bit of a build up as to what was that journey and then what really brought you to being a master coach today, creating change in people's lives and in the lives of their companies.
Yeah, it's I've been out in the work world for now more than 20 years, but we'll just leave it at 20 years for both our sakes and say it was a long dream. I think when you know that you have gifts that aren't being utilized to their full extent, you're always looking for another way to bring them to life. And that certainly was my case. I knew very early on in my studies that I was a pretty solid writer, that I loved to be on stages, and that I love to motivate people. And that happened really early because I was the oldest of a family of 5, and my parents were young. They were teenagers when they had me, and it sort of thrust me into this role of playing kind of mother hen to my younger siblings, but also paving the way and holding the hands of my parents who were children raising children. And we definitely went through things that not most children go through with their parents, but it empowered me to take on a role of, we can do this, we can do hard things, and put a lot of responsibility on my shoulders to take some first steps that had never been taken. I grew up in a small town in New England, up in the state of Maine, and my parents were neighbors and teenage sweethearts. And my mother was 16 when she had me. And it was, kind of a scandalous situation. And yeah, my parents, as young and inexperienced as they were incredibly hardworking and sat me down pretty early and said, we want you to recognize that you have a special role. You might not have been planned. So I was very aware from a very early age, which is a lot for a little one to handle, I will tell you. But you're exactly what the world needs, and you're going to light it on fire. And that story stuck with me. Now, there was a lot of positive things that came of it because I felt mission driven as a child. I have younger siblings depending on me. My parents are essentially living in poverty. They are teenagers. They don't have any careers of their own. They did not go to college right away, although my dad ended up going to college after all three of us graduated from graduate school. So I'll note that. Like, we did not, we came full circle and said, you will go now. We've done our part. But that just set me at like age 7. I just knew I had this big responsibility. And the only way I knew how to move forward was education and to take advantage of opportunities like being in theater or being on a stage or being a musician would afford me to get out of my little town. So I was the first to get on a plane in my family. I was the first to go to college, first to go to graduate school, and my siblings followed suit. So I have a brother who's an attorney. I have a sister who's a mental health worker, and all of them are very accomplished in their own right. I went on and did a lot in the world of international relations initially, and then I ended up in the world of public relations, which was much more suited to my writing, public speaking, being a spokesperson for companies and for organizations. And then, for me, the idea of being a motivational speaker was sort of baked into my roles in all of these places, whether at home growing up, or eventually I ended up in the C-suite in the public relations agency I worked for. And so my job was to raise up teams and to counsel CEOs and leaders, going through massive transitions or making, quite frankly, a lot of them were going through crises and having to respond and be reactive in moments of great uncertainty and to bolster their confidence. So I, throughout my career, have sort of played this role. So to come out at this particular point in time and to take it on as a full-time role as an entrepreneur really was sort of the natural next step. I've always worked for organizations. It was one of those things as a kid that grew up with very little. The, security and safety of working for a company was sort of perceived as the golden child job. But as we all know, it comes with lots of compromises and sacrifices. And while I had a phenomenal run, I have absolutely no qualms about my experience in corporate, but, it certainly had its challenges in navigating that, raising children and that kind of experience. I traveled globally significantly when my son was young, which was very hard on all of us. But I always knew there would come a point in time where I would be ready and my family would be ready for me to go ahead and take that next step and step into my passions more fully. So being able to write, create content, have conversations like we're having in this podcast, and to reach more people than I could within a corporate setting or in a family setting was always part of the dream. And something sort of my husband, when we met 20 some odd years ago, sort of knew that he was signing up, that this was going to be part of the journey at some point. So it's always been in the cards.
I listened to your story and obviously I've, got to know you and I've got to learn so much about you by just digesting your content and seeing who you are. And, I want to let our audience in a little bit on this because before we started the podcast, Michelle said, is there anything that, you want to ask before we get going? And I'm like, no, let's just have a free flowing conversation. And so there's nothing pre-planned by anything that we're doing. We just 100% two souls committed to serving and supporting anyone who has to hear what's going to unfold. But while you're speaking, Michelle, I'm thinking about what is my next question based on what you're saying. Where am I curious that the audience would want to know more? And it's usually, what do I want to know more? And as you are speaking, and I think, oh, that's a great follow-up question, you answer the question. And then you keep going, and then you answer the question. And so, I think what it's like for a 16-year-old mother and an 18-year-old father to bring this little girl into the world, and they've got to start this whole life. And we so often think about the poor mom and dad who now have to leave what was their life, their school, or the stability of what they had, and they have to grow up really fast. And I've always wondered, what is it like for the child to grow up in an environment like that? And then that was my question. And then you so beautifully articulated that your mom sat you down and said that you've got something so big to do in the world. And my follow-up question was, coming from an environment where you didn't have all of the stability and you didn't have all of the structure, and essentially you were, with teenage parents, and you didn't have people that had been in the workforce for 10, 15 years that had some level of stability and structure. So when you created stability and structure, I'm just so fascinated how you were able to give it up so easily, because I think that's where so many people get caught, is that you have the golden handcuffs. You're conditioned that you have to put your head down, you've got to work really hard, you've got to grow yourself, you've got to build a reputation, you've got to be really good at what you do. And then you've got to do things that are really safe so that we can live a good life and that we can have a good house and we can put a good amount of money in savings and everything is good. And you said, I want great. And I'm just curious if you could support our audience in, outside of being encouraged so beautifully by your mother, who I already adore, for being able to say, you've come here to do something really big and something so great, and you're going to change the world. But what was it that supported you in saying, I have the stability and the structure that I've worked for, and I'm really good at it, but I want to leave?
That's a great question, first of all. So thank you for asking. And it's making me think of other things I want to talk to you about. But I'll say a couple of things. One, I am not a spring chicken anymore. So I do think the reality is, as we get older, I've told you I have a 16-year-old myself, that I can't imagine him being in the situation of raising children. Thank God he's not. But I think about him, and he's getting ready to launch into the world, going to go to college in less than 2 years' time. And I think about the fact that the majority of the last 16 years have been raising a family. What comes next for me? And I wanted to make sure that before I got to the place of being an empty nester, that I already had things in motion that were well on their way. So I had already been fairly active in social. I had already been speaking more ad hoc. I hadn't yet committed to writing the book, which I will tell you, my 16-year-old had been on me since he was about 9. When are you going to write the book, Mommy? When are you going to write the book? I figured we should probably sit down and start to do that. I realized that I was going to have more regrets for not taking the leap and trying something new and really going forward with my passions and saying, okay, if I am a servant leader, which I like to think that I am, this is something I really evolved into, because I certainly didn't start that way as a 20-something, right? I was in it for what's in it for me, as a lot of us are when we're starting and we're just trying to get established. But as time went on and I realized that my fulfillment wasn't coming from the what is it for me questions, only came from how may I serve. And that came over time after going through some dark times and falling on my knees and failing even within the corporate setting. I didn't ever lose my job, but I certainly lost my footing and made me question why I was doing what I was doing. To get to that point where I had a really strong humming career and felt good about my contributions, but I was sitting in this spot a few years back going, I feel like I might have tapped out. I might have hit my ceiling. I'm an executive vice president. The last place for me to go is president. I could do that, but I've contributed at this really high level. I'm already the CEO whisperer in my circles. I've worked across multiple industries. I am the strategic counselor within my industry, within my career options. I had done really sort of the highs. And now I was sitting here going, well, what's next? And I knew what was next. All the things that I had been contemplating over the last 2 decades and saying one day, but not quite yet. I have some things to do, some things to accomplish, some things to experience, and I know it will come. And it really became more of, I will have more regrets if I don't do this than if I stay and just, I don't know, the proverbial stay fat and happy, right? Like, it would be very easy to stay within the corporate environment and continue to make bank and go on lovely vacations. But I think I would have a hard time looking at myself in the mirror, knowing that I had been given gifts that I was not using to my full potential, that I had already sort of maxed out, and I felt I had poured into the next generation of leaders, and I'm watching them thrive and come up through the system. I didn't really have anything left to prove in that environment. And I had a lot of uncharted territory in the entrepreneurial realm that I felt like it was time to get started on. So it really became a balance of regret. How many regrets do you want to live with? And I'm kind of a no regrets kind of person. I'll do something, and if I don't like it, I'll pivot. But I didn't want to sit back 20 years from now, 30 years from now and go, damn, I wish I had tried that. I wish I had thrown my hat in the ring. I wish I had expressed myself to my full potential. I had more to give than I gave.
You know, you've left so many clues in everything that you've just said, and I often will suggest people go back and re-listen to a section, because if we just learn from one person's lesson, we can go through the journey without having to have it had the experience ourselves, and we can get the vantage point at the end. And you touched so beautifully on, you had this knowing or this dream that you wanted to do something. You started feeling the pull or the calling, something saying there's something more. You started feeling, oh, I've hit the glass ceiling. I've tapped out. What else can I do? And then you started to think about, what would I regret if I didn't? And all of this is so important for people to listen to, and then to ask, where do they recognize these qualities within themselves? Not everybody wants to leave corporate America. Not everybody wants to leave their day job. Not everybody wants to leave their own company. Not everybody has that dream or that goal or desire. But I do believe that a tremendous amount of people are not living their highest and their greatest potential because they're not asking the questions. Or if the question's there, they're not answering the question. And so my advice would be to go back and re-listen to that. And then I'm going to ask you if you could give some advice to a listener right now that is you years back, who was starting to feel that pull. What would be some advice that you would give them to help them make that transition easier?
I think the first question is, are you living on autopilot or are you living intentionally? Because there had become a point where I got really good at what I was doing. But if I'm honest with myself, I was on autopilot. I was an incredibly busy executive, but I was on autopilot. I knew the schlick, I knew the job, I knew what was needed, and I was able to kind of get up, press go, and go through the motions of my day. And I kind of would step back and say, that was a good day. But I couldn't say that was an extraordinary day a lot of the time. And I'm a great vacationer. So one of the things that I learned at midlife, or maybe a little bit earlier than midlife, traveling for me is something that's in my blood. I've been traveling since I was about 16. The very first trip I went on, I was in Spain, and long story for another time. But we ended up taking in an exchange student because my family, who had nothing, had more room for more people to come in, and as a result, her parents said, "We'd love for Michelle to come and spend the summer with us." So that sort of set me off on I want to learn a foreign language. I want to travel. And so for me, and one of the gifts that my family enjoys is we travel. We travel 3 or 4 times a year fairly extensively. And I know that you do as well. And it's sort of something that's in our blood. For me, travel is not just the luxury of escape. It is the time where I hit pause and allow a lot of dreams to come forward. And so I would go away on a vacation and say, that was extraordinary. I literally put the Michelle Rios executive on hold for a little bit. And I would meet with people on the street, and I would talk with that woman in the bar, or that guy at the cafe, and the barber shop that my husband went and got his haircut at. And we got invited to so-and-so's house in Greece. And we would just do stuff that most people don't do on vacation. Like, we weren't the typical Disney vacationers. We were deep in an adventure in a foreign country. And when I would do that, I would come back so reinvigorated of, what did we do that was different? We connected with people at a soul level. I was never afraid to ask the big questions, like, what is it that you really want out of life? What is it that you wish you would have done that you haven't done yet that's still there? It would be like one of those, like, you don't know these people that well, so who cares? Like, ask the deep questions. And that's now become our thing. Like, people know that. Like, when they're going on vacation with us, there's going to be some deep conversations amidst the relaxation. But that kind of thinking would make me come back from a vacation and go, that was extraordinary. We connected with strangers that people we didn't know. And we talked about the things that were most important to us in our life. And it was so revealing, because in the day-to-day routine, we don't have time often to go there. Or we're guarded about being too revealing about what we really want. And that became very telling for me. I then started to bring that into my actual life as an executive. I'm like, wait a minute, I have quite a bit of agency. I'm sort of at the top of the food chain here. I can be different. And so I started to be more confident and brave about saying, what do you really want? Particularly for people that I didn't see thriving. Because they're like, if you don't really want to be here, where can we help you go? And where people are like, you're going to help me go somewhere else. I'm like, well, if you're not happy here, you're costing me and it's actually draining all of us. So where do you want to go? We'll get you there. And so that became like, Michelle's going to be a connector. And that allowed me to say to myself and to those around me, what do you really want? And if you don't know, spend some time getting quiet, asking yourself. I spent the first 25 or 26 years of my life doing what I thought was required. I don't have any regrets, but I will tell you the difficulty in living that way, and I know people well into their 40s that still live this way, is that you inherit these beliefs about what you think you should be doing and how you should be living, and you're completely disconnected from who you truly are. It nearly cost me my life in my mid-20s because I became so disconnected from self that I no longer knew my why. I didn't have a real why because I wasn't anchored to a why. After my siblings were launched on their own and doing well, my why started to disappear. I was the pave the path, make sure my family did well, get us out of generational poverty. Check, check, check. Now what's my why? It took really coming down to my knees and staring at a 10th story window at a deep place of despair, a place I had never been before, going 150 miles an hour while full-time graduate studies on a scholarship, working full-time as one of the youngest directors of communications for this large organization, staring out the 10th story window, going, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't know what my why is. And I don't feel like I can go through this 150 mile an hour pace anymore. And thankfully, that didn't come to fruition, but it led me on a journey of self-discovery that if I hadn't gone through that really painful, probably 6 months of my life of experiencing probably what was clinical depression, but I didn't know because no one talked about it back then. And God forbid that Michelle have a mental health issue, which is sort of ironic since my sister became a mental health worker, but that anyone in my family would have one because there was a stigma associated with that. And I had so many great things happening for me. I had a lot to be grateful for. But the reality is that incredibly dark period of time pulled me down to a place that said, what do you want? You don't even know who you are. You're doing what everyone told you should do and what you think other people want you to do. But now you're thousands of miles away from where any of these people that you started with live, and you're living your own life, and you don't even know who you are. So that became the beginning of my personal development journey that got me on a track of recognizing that introspection and spending time connecting at a soul level with myself, first and foremost, was not only a necessity, it was a requirement of living well. Like this idea that we are spiritual beings having a human experience was sort of a novel concept back then, but it made a lot of sense to me. And once sort of that clicked into place, and it was this recognition of this journey is not what it seems, this facade that I've lived on the outside to get to this certain level, which opened a tremendous amount of doors, was just that. It was the facade to the real deal, which was the internal journey. So, starting at 26, I got to really hit a reset button in a lot of ways and say, okay, now what? How are you going to live this differently, even on this path? I was well up, climbing up a ladder, but within those confines of a ladder, what could you do differently? And that's when I started asking, how may I serve? The fulfillment out of that and the connections to the people and the recognition that the getting more stuff wasn't actually doing it for me, and getting more promotions wasn't doing it for me. In this concept of more, there was no end to it. There was no end to the how much will fill your soul, because the reality is there was never going to be a dollar amount that made me feel whole. And I didn't know that. As a kid who came from poverty, I thought once you made a certain amount of money, then everything fell into place, because that was the woe that had befallen my family. So if I fixed that, life would be good. There would be happiness. We'd all feel peaceful. And here's the reality. I was making bank and the least peaceful, staring at a 10th story window, thinking maybe if I jumped, everything would be better. It doesn't get worse than that, I think, in a lot of ways, right? Where you're like, how did I get to this dark place? And I often ask people well into their 40s, have you really thought about what you want? Not about what was expected of you. You got married like everyone's quote unquote supposed to. You had the 2 kids like everyone's quote unquote supposed to. You got the house. You're in a great career. You're making a certain amount of money. You have X number of vacations. Okay, great. You're on that journey. But what do you want? Is that what you want? Or is there something within that that's nuanced that you don't even know yet? And it's surprising to me. And I think really what drives me in a lot of ways is recognizing how many people have gotten to this stage of life and have never had anyone question or allowed them to open up to say, no one ever asked me what I wanted. I've been on autopilot.
You know what's so beautiful about everything that you just said is that the minute I asked the question that if somebody has a dream or a goal or desire to do something and they want to leave their job, we split the audience because not everybody wants to leave their job. And my follow-up question was going to be to the other half of the audience, but you already gave it, and you gave it so beautifully because you said at one point in time, you started saying after your travels, how can I bring the joy that I'm finding there, the connection I'm creating there, the person I'm showing up there, how can I bring that into who I am today? And so for somebody who's listening to this that doesn't have a dream to leave corporate America, but is still feeling the pull, still feeling the why, they still want to know who and what they can do and be and achieve, that it is so okay to be able to do it right where they are. And I think so many people that are not blossoming, it is for the very reasons that you've just stated. And when I look at anyone's life, we can always look at what has transpired that has led them to be qualified to be who they are today. And what you're learning today and tomorrow will qualify you for who you get to be in the days to come. And you use all of the beautiful words, self and soul, and we're learning and we're experiencing. And I want to bring this forward a little further. I love that you so beautifully always remind people to get to live their authentic self. Could you speak a little into what do you do when you work with individuals or organizations to remind them to be their authentic self?
Yeah. Oh, it's such an important question. I mean, authenticity is probably my favorite topic. And everyone's like, well, what do you mean? Be your true self. Like, how hard is that? And I said, it's the simplest and most difficult thing for everybody, because when you get right down to it, most of us don't know who we are, because that requires time in solitude. That requires time in introspection. We live in a culture that's based on going fast and achieving quickly and move, right? Like it's all achievement based. And when you're moving fast and you're moving quick, when is there time for real introspection, right? And I often say to people, it doesn't really matter where you are. The question is that you know who you are, wherever that is. You can bloom wherever you're planted. Let's just be honest. I spent 20 some odd years in corporate, ups and downs of the navigating that world, but blooming. I was thriving. But I would ask myself some pretty critical questions. And it came from recognizing there was a split from my early life, which was how much can I get? How far can I go? And what can this get me? To how may I serve? What is my purpose? How can I connect with others? Because that really makes me feel alive. And if you can identify what it is that lights you up, what brings you joy, then I can tell you that's where we're going to find what your gifts are. And once we know what your gifts are, we're going to lean into what those are. Where can you bring your gifts? whether it's at home, whether it's within your friend group, whether it's at your job, whether it's at your kids' little league or basketball or wherever. But to be able to express those is a need. You're not given gifts so that you can hold them and hoard them. You're given gifts so that you can give them away. And most people don't get that. Most people think that they have a gift or a talent or whatever, and that's sort of a luxury. It's their own thing. They do on their own time. And I'm like, that's such erroneous thinking. The gifts that you have are for you to give away. And when you express that over and over and over again, first of all, it is not about you. And that's a hard thing for our ego to get our heads around, right? It's not about you. You think it's all about you, but it's really about that person that needs that message or that gift or that impact that you don't even know that you're impacting them. So that's that piece of it. But your job is to give it away. The more you give it away, the more you feel filled up. It is the counterintuitive way of living, right? But it is what makes sense. Once you start doing it, you realize it is not the accumulation of more that fills you up. It is the giving away of what you have as gifts. And once you start to realize that, you're like, well, I know you know this. You get up on stage and you speak from your heart and from your soul, and you might come away drained on a physical level, but you are filled at a deep soul level, and you just kind of float away like, yeah, this is what it's all about. And until somebody experiences whatever that gift is, whether it's, I don't care, fixing cars or sewing or baking, and you start to use it to impact others positively, that's the feeling where you're just going to feel like I can do this all day long, even if they never paid me. I just enjoy what happens at people's response. It just sparks something in me. Find that, whatever it is that brings you joy. In there, that's where we start to identify what the gifts are. And once you know what the gifts are, the rest starts to fall into place really rather quickly.
I was speaking in New York City this week, and we actually asked everybody that was in attendance to share what is their unique gift, what is their superpower. And everyone went through the room and they were just, oh, I sing beautifully, or I play the piano or the violin or whatever it was. And they were going through the room. And one lady who I happen to know, she wasn't expecting the question. And she stood up and she said, I love people through baking. And then she went to the fridge and she went and brought Tupperware out that she had brought, where she had baked all of these goods for everyone in attendance, and handed them to people. And, there was obviously a gap of time between when she went and got the cookies. But, she had baked all these different goodies from her home country so that people could feel the love and the warmth of, where her culture is and where she's from. And she does this all the time, from what I understand. And it's about bringing what you love so much of who you are and doing it in your function. She's not paid to do it. She's paid for a completely different function, and she's incredibly brilliant at it. But this is another way for her to show up as her most authentic self. And in case anyone in the audience missed it, Michelle, you just mentioned that when you connect with people, you said, I feel alive. When I connect with people, I feel alive. Those were your words. And when we connect with people, it's the one thing that every single person on the planet wants is connection. And the only way for us to create connection, the only way, is for us to share a moment of vulnerability in some way, in some shape, and in some form. And if that is bringing baked goods to a big conference and handing them out because you spent your entire weekend pouring your heart and soul into something that somebody would eat for 30 seconds, and that lights you up and it makes somebody's day in that room, then that's the thing that you should be doing. Because in that moment, you're letting somebody see you. For so many people, they are wanting to be seen and they're expecting people to just see them. But what people very rarely know is that they need to show people, and only when you show can you be seen. And so I love so much that you get to do that and bring that into business. So tell us a little bit about what it is that you do today. You're so uniquely qualified to support people in companies, within business, and then also for people who want to follow in your footsteps of what it is that you do. But what is your wheelhouse? If you were to say that this is what I thrive in the most, what would that be?
Really, I would say twofold. One, I know business. I've been in the business world for a really long time. So, in terms of understanding what really is the essence of what makes businesses function well, and I think it's the heart of leadership. That's something I'm very passionate about. So, I work with organizations in really helping to have their leaders recognize the importance of collaboration and then working individually with their leaders, because the strongest individual leaders make for better environments and cultures within companies, which I'm sure you know very well as yourself. So creating that space for individual leaders to be heard, to be seen, to recognize that they too, as leaders, need their time to be heard and seen. Because as leaders, they carry a very big burden of leading other people and making sure other people are seen and heard. And I often think it's the case where the shoemaker's kids who have no shoes, right? We have leaders that we expect to have lead, but we don't often feed them what they need. So I love working with leaders. I think it's one of those underserved needs within corporate America. So there's that piece. But I love working one-on-one. When people come to me, usually there's one of two things happening. Either they feel stuck within their career and they know they can be doing more, but they're not quite sure what that is. Or they've made a monumentous decision and now they're like, oh my God, I've made this big decision. I'm making a big change. I recognize I may need some help in helping them craft a team and really creating the environment and the plans and the mindset for creating the change that they want to see happen in their lives. I'm really big on, I know that you're having a good life. Not really interested in the good life. You can have a good life on your own, but what is going to make it extraordinary? That's where I come into play. You want
So
an
you,
extraordinary life, you call me. We'll talk about how we do that.
you so beautifully set up my closing questions, because I have two questions for you. And my second to last question was, on your podcast, the Live Your Extraordinary Life podcast, you ask your guests, what does it mean to live an extraordinary life? And you rarely get to answer the question yourself. And so we would like to ask you, what does it mean to you, Michelle Rios? What does it mean to live an extraordinary life?
Oh, well, I love that question. And, for me, it's to live authentically from a soul place on a daily basis, which means I spend a lot of time being very vulnerable and open to people that I don't know that well on purpose, because I think the more I can live from a place of vulnerability comfortably, and show to people that you can thrive even when you're open and you bring your walls down. I sleep soundly, I energize, I connect, I create impact. And that to me is where the secret sauce is at. It's this beautiful space of having people go, I can't believe you just shared that with me, but thank you. I needed to hear that. I love being in this space of saying, what can I take from my own experience and help you realize you're not alone? Most times I've either been there or we know other people that have been there, and you don't have to do this alone, and you're going to be okay. Not only are you going to be okay, but the fact that we're here having this conversation means you want to get better at whatever is happening. And the extraordinary is not just something that's available for you say the rich and the famous or the wealthy or what have you. No, not at all. It is a state of mind and a state of being. And I have recognized full on that the more I focus on connecting and impact, the more fulfilled, the more my vibration is in a joyful place, the more of that experience I have every single day of my life. And a lot of it is very unplanned. It feels serendipitous, but it's exactly the way it was needing to unfold. So for me, it is really about being in this walk that says, how may I serve? How can I create impact? And how can I bring more of my gifts to the world in a way that will help others step into their authenticity? Because that's really where living an extraordinary life is at. When you can really look at yourself in the mirror and say, the good, the bad, the ugly, the parts that need to be evolved, I love it all. That's who I am, and I like who I am. I sleep really well at night, Rudy, and knowing I am an perfectly imperfect person. And that's not something I could have said 25 years ago. It's
Oh
been a
my God.
journey.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. You just, I mean, again, so much value in every one of these responses. And so, my last question for you is, what has been a book that you have read that's just absolutely changed your way of being?
Probably The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I know a lot of people would say that, but I would tell you, I was on my own odyssey. I left my tiny little town. I went all over the world. I lived overseas for many years. I lived in Washington, D.C. I was in the School of Foreign Service. I was on my own odyssey trying to find myself. And it took my grandmother's death. And for somebody who grew up with teenage parents, you can only imagine the important role my grandmother had in helping to raise me in my early years. But I was in my 30s. I got notification that my grandmother passed away. And of course, as the communications person, I had to go home and give the eulogy. And I was preparing to tell all the wonderful things about my grandmother, the one thing that really brought me to my knees as I went to go up to the pulpit to give the eulogy was realizing here was a woman that had had so much heartache in her life, lost a daughter at 8 years old to diphtheria, a son in the Korean War at age 19, while my father was just being born. My grandfather became a raging alcoholic. She overcame cancer. All of these things, poverty was sort of like the experience of her life. Never spoke an ill word in her life and was the most joyous person I ever knew. And when I thought about safety and home, it was my grandmother. And as I'm standing there, a woman who had become a sophisticated businesswoman who traveled all over the world and was doing great and all these great experiences, I realized that I had not yet become half of the woman that my grandmother was, having never left our town. So the book, The Alchemist, really struck me as I felt like the protagonist that had gone on this massive journey to basically come home, to realize that who I was and who I needed to be was always there waiting for me to discover.
Oh my gosh. I could ask you another 5 questions just from that one response alone, but we are at time. And I want to thank you so much for coming and pouring into us so beautifully. I knew in the beginning of this episode that we were going to be two kindred souls or spirits here having such a beautiful conversation because we so beautifully align on so many of our beliefs and our values of how we get to show up and how we get to serve. And I just love how you were reminding people that they get to be their most beautiful and most empowered self. And the Empowered Life podcast is about reminding people that everything they want to have and be and do and achieve already resides within us. And you are so authentically reminding people that they get to live their authentic life and to live an extraordinary life and to always reach for more. And so thank you for just loving and pouring into everybody. For anyone who is interested in learning a little bit more about you, we're going to go ahead and put your website. We're going to put your Instagram links. We're going to put the link to your podcast inside of our show. I'm going to strongly encourage you go over and learn what does it take to live an extraordinary life by listening to Michelle Rios' podcast. Thank you for spending some time with us. I appreciate you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, Rudy.
To everybody listening, thank you for investing in you. And we 100% hold a vision of you living your highest and your greatest potential. We love you, and we'll catch you in the next episode of the Empowered Life podcast.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. And we would love your support in leaving us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Make sure to check the show notes for more information on how you can find us online and on Instagram. Now go create an amazing day for yourself, and we'll see you again soon.